The first in a dozen years, perhaps hardly the last. The litigation, the calendar, will they soon enough compel an alternative? The Easter recess wasn't as rambunctious as perhaps the Arkansas delegation feared, but it was spirited. And their Arkansas counterparts beginning to reassemble. Arkansas Week next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for Arkansas Week. Something of a milestone, at least in recent history for the state of Arkansas. On Thursday night, for the first time in 12 years, the state put to death a condemned inmate. And here to talk about that and other issues in the news, Sarah White-Kodachek of Arkansas Public Media, Wesley Brown of Talk Business and Politics, and Steve Bronner, an independent journalist. Wesley, you and Sarah and yours truly have been doing very little else for the last 2 weeks except watching the execution story. Wes, you were there at Varner last night.
Yeah, it was kind of one of the same situation as Monday night on Don Davis and Bruce Ward, but this time there's a wait-and-see kind of atmosphere. A flurry of court filings in state courts, federal courts, and all the way up to the Supreme Court. Liddell Lee was the inmate that was, he had a cellmate, Stacy Johnson, who was also supposed to be executed on Thursday, but he received a stay from the Arkansas Supreme Court earlier in the day, but all through the day, Liddell Lee, it looked like, Sarah, that it was going to happen. Around 7 o'clock, that was the time the execution was supposed to start. It was pushed out to 8:15, then to 9:30, then to 11 o'clock, and finally around 11:15, we got the news in the media center at Cummins Prison that he was going to be executed. Got a confirmation that the Supreme Court had basically denied several requests. I think it was 6 requests for stays, a temporary injunction to halt the execution, but it went forward. At 11:44, he went into the execution chamber. It only took him 12 minutes to die. He died at 11:56, 4 minutes before midnight. The Arkansas Department of Corrections spokesman, Solomon Graves, came into the newsroom exactly at midnight and told us and confirmed that he had died. So it was media from across the globe was there. Very surreal because the three previous executions that were scheduled didn't happen, and that was kind of that feeling that this might not happen either after all the last minute stays. So very interesting.
At the end, from the start, the legal, and it has to be said, one of the political concerns was that the execution would be marred by some malfunction or another. That evidently did not happen according to the pool reports.
No, I think one of the witnesses said the curtain came up at 11:44. He had already had the lethal injection or the connections into his veins, and it started almost immediately where it's what was called the 3-drug protocol. He was put midazolam, which is the first, was put, and he was unconscious, and then after that, basically he, through the consciousness checks, he basically, the description was he was almost asleep, at 11:56. So I think a lot of reporters were expecting it to be longer, but typically that's most of the executions that are not botched or when nothing happens are very short.
Yeah, Sarah. At one point, I think in one of the state's appeals briefs or responses to an appeal, the term avalanche of litigation was used. I believe that was in one of the states, and it literally was. You could fill a closet with the paper that was full.
I think up until yesterday morning, there was...
And not just in Mr. Lee's case, but in the four that were pending.
The big picture litigation was the federal case that Judge Baker ruled on and then was overturned by the Eighth Circuit. There was the possibility until yesterday that the U.S. Supreme Court would rule on that, and there was a circuit split in between the Sixth Circuit and the 11th cases that would have given the U.S. Supreme Court a basis to take up this question of, is midazolam effective anesthetic? There's not hardly any human data on what effect it has. And then there's some technical issues around whether inmates are required to present their own alternative source of death that's legal for midazolam to be ruled out. So it was possible the U.S. Supreme Court could have chosen this slate of executions to revisit that issue, and as we saw with Neil Gorsuch making his first ruling as a tenure on the court, he's reaffirmed the conservative majority of 5-4. They chose not to hear the case. They chose not to stay the execution. Then alternately, another challenge from the drug company McKesson, which the Department of Correction has had a decades-long relationship with. The company sued the department, claiming that the staff had deceived them about what they were intending to use the drug for. And in testimony this week, there was a dispute about whether, in a phone call between a deputy director and McKesson salesperson based in Little Rock, whether the department had said, we want to use this for an execution, or whether, according to the McKesson salesperson, they just said, we don't want a paper trail, but we need this drug for something, can you put it through? They asked for it back, and then the department refused to return it. Circuit court judge stayed the use of the drug temporarily until the Supreme Court ruled yesterday. So these decisions about the two kind of significant legal issues that could have potentially stopped all the executions weren't decided until close to the 11th hour yesterday.
One literally needed a grid,
Yes.
Wesley, to keep track with all of the appeals, the responses.
Yeah, I wrote a story in basically the flurry of on several tracks. I think it was basically how creative the attorneys were. They were arguing on one hand the issue with the 3-drug protocol, and on the other they were arguing on the basis of DNA. Then other areas they were arguing about the mental capacity of these inmates. And there were other issues that are out there. So it was just, and it was hard to keep up when you're especially being at Arkansas Department of Corrections, where we didn't have great access to outside information, and so it was difficult to kind of monitor that and also monitor what was also happening inside the prison. So very, very unusual situation.
I'm sorry, sir.
Oh, well, and I was going to say, Supreme Court Justice Breyer cited that flurry of litigation in his dissent, saying, that it seemed an example of the arbitrariness of the death penalty.
Mr. Hutchinson's press secretary, Governor Hutchinson's press secretary, acknowledged last night or Thursday night that when he signed the death warrants for those 8 inmates, according to J.R. Davis, Mr. Hutchinson's news aide, the governor never anticipated that all 8 executions would in fact be carried out. Indeed, it appears that at this juncture, no more than 4 of those 8 will be carried out. 4 executions scheduled next week. 1 has already been stayed. In doing their best as officers of the court and attorneys for the inmates, Wes used the term creative. The state used other terms, and in fact, so did the Eighth Circuit, and certainly so did the Arkansas Prosecutors Association, which was archly critical of some of the paper filed by the inmates' attorneys. Do we have an abusive process here?
Well, I think, in a situation like this, when you are, I think the attorneys in some of their arguments, they were caught off guard by the fact that you got 8 executions in 11 days. So it creates that kind of atmosphere where, and I've heard from both sides that some of the filings were what do you call it, throw it against the wall and see if it stick. And but I still think the entire process that started this leads to that kind of behavior, and that's what we're seeing. And I guarantee you, on Monday, we're going to go through the same process with Jack Jones and Marcel Williams, who are expected to be executed on Monday at 7 o'clock. I think we're going to see that happen all the way up to possibly midnight again.
You see any reason to differ with that, Sarah?
No,
That outlook?
I agree. And as to your point, I think that the Supreme Court and the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, while they didn't rule for the stays, ultimately they did grant temporary stays, which shows their consideration of those issues before allowing someone to be put to death. So it's not just the attorneys that are defending their clients, but it's also the courts that are taking that time to consider everything.
Too much time or not enough, depending on which judge or justice you're talking about. There were some particularly tart dissents among the members of the Arkansas Supreme Court, language that's rarely employed by the justices regarding their their dissents.
Yeah, there was.
And at the there was some dissents also at the U.S. Supreme Court, which are absolutely genteel compared to some of the language that the states.
And I think it's one of those situations where it's closer to home, and there, I mean, if you go to the circuit court filings on, I think it was Bruce Ward case or Dan Davis case, and it's literally when you put Dan Davis's name in, you can go down and see the dozens of filings. And I think that the High Court was faced with those issues and trying to decide, and they're not used to I think the Supreme Court is kind of used to, is able to return a verdict and go through because of the help that they have with law clerks. But the High Court, you could see that frustration in some of their arguments and when they issued these rulings.
One more thing on this subject before we move on. There are, after these 8 inmates their cases are disposed of in one way or another,
Right.
that leaves approximately 24 individuals, all men, on Arkansas's death row. The midazolam expires at the end of April. Beyond that, what?
Well,
And it's almost impossible now to
You
obtain.
mentioned J.R. Davis, the governor's spokesman. He said on Monday that the governor, after everything has taken place, after April 30, specifically on the Don Davis and Bruce Ward case, he said that the governor's going to sit down with his staff, take a look at these issues. I've even heard some discussion of a new a protocol in terms of lethal injection. That's been discussed out of states. Nitrogen,
Firing squads.
Yeah, well, other states have other options on the books, but Arkansas's is lethal injection. Sarah, I don't know what you're
Well,
seeing out there.
interestingly, the electrocution chair is a legal second option, and the department does have one. And there has been no discussion of turning to the electrocution chair.
All right, got to move on. Dr. Bronner, it's been an interesting Easter recess for the Arkansas congressional delegation, most members, or some members of which anyway. These town halls have been held across the country. Sometimes they got pretty raucous. Ours, again, were fairly genteel, I suppose, by comparison.
It was pretty raucous here.
It's okay.
Senator Cotton and Representative French Hill met with 750 of their constituents on Monday in Little Rock at 2 p.m. at the Embassy Suites Hotel. It was full. They had to get more space and more chairs, and it was much like you've seen on TV elsewhere, and an echo of what we saw in 2009 that Democrats faced in parts of the country, where questions were asked from the audience in a very pointed way, lots of booing and jeering, and occasional, not just occasional, random shouting from the audience. And then there was a group of supporters sitting in the front too. So it was very, on one side, an example of a vibrant democracy. On the other, a side of just how divided we are and how vocally divided the country is right now. There were good questions asked and specific answers given at times. Both Senator Cotton and Representative Hill shied away from talking about from any kind of requirement that President Trump would reduce his tax returns. At the same time, they both said that they would make a commitment, and that there was a commitment already there, that anything that was found out with the investigation on Russia into the elections, they would let the facts lead the investigation. So there was, at some level there was some dialogue, but it was not civil discourse.
Is this any evidence of any kind of changing dynamic out there, or broad public opinion in Arkansas, basically just a letting off of steam here?
You would think it'd be more about letting off steam, because these days the member of Congress makes an announcement that he's going to have a town hall, and instantly on Facebook and other social media, then the troops are rallied on the other side, and there is the communication is go out there and let them know what you think, and very, very, very heartily. So, I think that the members of Congress can be confident that there are, for every 700 people who are yelling at them, not all of them were yelling at them, but a lot of them were, there are, of course, 3 million Arkansans who were at home or at work at that time. At the same time, intensity in politics matters, and people who really care about an issue can often sway things, opposed to a majority that's just sort of sitting at home. So it's not irrelevant, but at the same time, Representative Hill and Senator Cotton can take comfort in the fact that Arkansas is still very reliably red state.
Well, it's going to be a busy week, Steve. We've got a debt vote coming up. Also, now the Trump administration seems to want to revive health care, says we're working on that. It's going to be great. The wall is back in business.
Tax reform has come up.
Yeah. Any sense from the delegation at all on what their sense is? That debt vote could really blow up, but even though I think it was Senator Cotton said he didn't expect a big showdown over there.
On health care, or which one?
Or on the debt vote.
Oh.
Debt ceiling.
I haven't heard anything, much like the execution. The standard operating procedure is delay up until the last minute. Everybody gets all worried, the markets get a little jittery, and then they vote to extend, and we have then we kick the can down the road on the national debt. So I haven't heard a lot of angst about that. You're also hearing, there's a lot of appointments that are still yet to be filled. In fact, at the moment, there are 0 U.S. attorneys in the United States of America. There are the Trump administration asked for all 93 to resign, and under Obama, and they have not been replaced. So there are just so many things that have yet to be done. The big hurdle, getting the Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch confirmed, is done, but there's a lot left to do.
Yeah, and the whole issue, the health care issue, which was one that has resonated across the nation for since the Obama administration. The Republicans promised, they ran on the promise that they were going to do something about it, and that's still not only in the Democratic Party, who is fighting to keep some of those things, but there is an anger in the Republican Party over not the fact that they haven't done anything. A lot of those people didn't come to that meeting, but that you can still see some of that anger out there that from what are the business Republicans, and there's a split, business Republicans versus the social conservatives. So that issue, if an issue of debt ceiling, these are promises that the Trump administration made, and a lot of these issues are still out there. That the longer this presidency runs and those critical issues don't get addressed, it's going to become very clustered in Washington, D.C. And the pressure is not. You're going to have some impact on the president, but it's going to go down ticket to people like French Hill, like Tom Cotton, and other representatives in Arkansas who have supported the president on all these issues.
Well, with Congress returning to Washington on Monday or Tuesday, soon enough, the Arkansas General Assembly will be returning to Little Rock. Mm-hmm. Never really leaves.
Well, they return May 1st. They'll wrap up business on the legislative session that just ended. It's very pro forma. Very little, there's not expected to be much to do at all. The governor vetoed a few bills. There's unlikely to be a big effort to override those vetoes, even though it only takes a majority to do so. Mm-hmm. Then, tentatively, immediately, they will go into a 3-day special session about health care, in which they will pass the legislative the framework that will enable the governor to continue making changes to Arkansas Works. There'll be he is seeking a waiver from the Trump administration to have a work requirement for recipients, and also to reduce the number of people who are eligible for Arkansas Works. It's now 138% of the federal poverty level. It'll be 100% if we get the waiver. So that session will be about getting the legislative framework available to do that. Shouldn't be very controversial. Other thing that they'll do very quickly, the legislature passed 24 laws that changed the medical marijuana amendment, and they will simply kind of reorganize that into a more organized framework and pass it as part of one bill.
Yeah. State got some more good news on Friday morning, Wes.
Well, we had
a new record, another record.
Yeah, our unemployment rate keeps ratcheting down. It's at 3.6% now, 3.6%.
3.6, yeah.
And that's a full percentage point lower than the U.S. Jobless rate. Still, it doesn't say a lot. I mean, when you get down to that low, it's one of those questions: how low can you go? It means that the people have jobs, but there's not a lot of information in the data to tell what type of jobs you have. In some of the wage is slightly increasing, but not at a pace that keeps up with the inflation rate. So I think, and it also shows that jobs are hard to find in the field that you want to find them in.
So the Fed can stand down, or we can anticipate the Fed won't do anything on it?
I think they're going to hold off on interest rates over they had said early in the year they were going to be aggressive 2 or 3 more this year, but there are still things that are taking place in the economy that warrants them to kind of hold off, and I think the Trump administration is kind of trying to put pressure on the Feds to hold off on the interest rates. But the thing about a lot of times about the Fed, it's unpredictable. You don't know when that interest rate, you get forecasts of how things might happen, but we'll just have to wait and see. If the stock market keeps sliding back a little bit, I don't think we'll see an interest rate hike.
M&A news for us?
The banks, Home Bank Shares, Bank of Ozark, and Simmons First National all announced their earnings, strong earnings. But all those banks are now, they all started as community banks, but all of them are over $10 billion in assets now through various acquisitions. Each bank are going to close on acquisitions in 2017. Each of those banks will be over $13 billion. I think Bank of Ozark is about $20 billion right now in assets. Home Bank Shares and Simmons, $13 billion. So our Arkansas banks are growing. Simmons is now, it's going to be in 7 states. Home Bank Shares, half of their operations is in Florida now. So these Arkansas banks are expanding across the country.
Bigger or bust is the rule.
Yeah, bigger or bust. Yeah.
Okay. We, in a few seconds remaining, we would note, take note of a passing in Arkansas politics. We were informed that early this morning, I believe in his native Pine Bluff, former United States Representative Jay Dickey, who sat for the 4th Congressional District, mostly back then anyway, South Arkansas, served 8 years, 4 terms in the House beginning in 1993. Mr. Dickey died this morning. You will recall that he was defeated by former U.S. Representative Mike Ross in the election of 2000. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.